But you are a professor. You've got your doctorate in sociology, your PhD.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, how long have you been teaching?
Altogether, it's got to be 25 years.
Yeah. You loved it?
Yeah.
And before you did that, you were a corrections officer, weren't you?
Probation.
Probation.
Yeah, so I started off, after I got out of undergraduate,
Yeah.
I needed a job.
Yeah.
And so I started off with McLennan County Probation.
Okay.
Did that for just a real short period of time because one of my professors said, "Have you ever thought about going to graduate school?" I said, "No, not really." He goes, "Well, they'll pay you to go." And so I went and started graduate school at the same time because they were paying my tuition and I was getting a little bit of a stipend.
Yeah, yeah.
After I got done with that, I worked for Baylor for a couple of years.
Okay.
As basically researcher. I taught some classes, but I was doing research for one of the centers there.
Yeah.
Then I thought, I want to go ahead and get my PhD, so I went out to Arizona, worked there in probation, and went to University of Arizona.
Yeah. And then I met you, you were my boss for a while, but the interesting thing for me, how old are you now?
55.
You're 55, 5 years younger than me. You get the Iron Man award because you wanted to go to the police academy. You took a sabbatical.
So a number of years ago, I had this idea. I was thinking about why police officers quit.
Yeah.
The sort of the attrition rates. And mostly at the time, I was kind of thinking about it in terms of, because I had looked at an article in the, IACP
Yeah.
magazine. And it was talking about just the level of attrition from the time that people start the academy, finish the academy, get through their first 18 months, all these kinds of things. And I thought, holy cow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole lot of people who were starting only to end up, 18 months out of the career field, because it's a pretty big investment in terms of time and energy and effort. And I was thinking about it really from the standpoint of a department, a department that goes through, and you know this, I mean, you were doing those kinds of backgrounds and recruitment. You put a whole lot of time and energy in actually finding someone, only
huge
have
investment.
Yeah. And then they step out, about the same time that they're finally really useful to the department as an officer. So I got thinking about that and thought, wow, I mean, that's $100,000 lost, $200,000, I don't know, but it's got to be pretty expensive. And so I went to my dean and I said, I'd like to go to the police academy. And she said, no. And the reason why, I mean, it made sense, is I couldn't interfere with my teaching schedule. So I realized, okay, so what I'm going to have to do is get a research sabbatical. So I applied for the sabbatical, and it got approved, and then we just had to find the right time for me to be able to go to the academy. And that took, about a year just for the timing to line up. But the timing lined up, and they called me one day and they said, all right, this is it. If you want to go, you're in. And I had a short conversation with my wife. I thought about I'm not getting any younger.
Yeah, right.
But I had a short conversation with my wife, and she said, let's go. So
she was really supportive of you.
Yeah, without her, I never would have been able to do it. I never would have finished it.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're talking, this was like December 20th.
Yeah, yeah.
And the academy was starting on the 5th of January. So,
wow.
I had about, a couple of weeks to kind of get ready for it.
Yeah.
And, I wish if I had known it was going to happen then, I would have spent more time getting more physically ready for the whole thing.
Yeah.
But
you still get the Iron Man award because you successfully completed
thank
it.
you. Yeah. No, it was rough. I mean, it was rough. I mean, I think this is something that people don't quite get about the academy. I know a lot of the cadets that I was with, a lot of cadets that I've talked to since, they don't realize what an investment it's actually going to be. It's not. You don't go to school.
Yeah.
The academy's not school. The academy's a job. And you've got to think of it like a full-time job because,
exactly, yeah.
For most of the people who are there, of course, you've been retained by a police agency, so you're getting paid to actually do this. But I think that for many of the cadets, they think about it as going to school, and I think that's a detriment to.
I am so glad you're bringing that up. It is a detriment, isn't it?
No, because they're not serious about it. They think they're just taking classes. But these are the kinds of classes that you're taking that if you take it to heart, it could save your job, it could save your career, it could save your life.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things, if you're going to be successful in the academy, that you have to be able to do is recognize, this is my job, this is my profession, and commit to that profession. And I expect, and this is something that my research is trying to kind of deal with, is to what extent are people who are going to the academy in it for a career? And I think a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are there because they're not sure what they're going to do next. Policing sounds interesting. And I think for some of those folks that don't make it that full 18 months out of the academy, I think that's what happened to them.
Yeah.
They didn't know what they were getting into. They weren't ready for a career in law enforcement.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so they said, you're good to go on January 5th. So I start, walking, I start running, I start rowing, I start doing all those kinds of things to sort of get ready. And I'm not, January 5th rolls around, I'm still not ready, but I'm in it. And so whenever we start running, I'm not the fastest person out there, but I'll say I wasn't the slowest one either.
Yeah. You could say you're in the middle of the pack at least.
Well, maybe the back middle, but
okay.
But I was in the pack, and it depended on what we were doing.
Yeah.
Push-ups, I was good with. Sprinting, a little bit slower.
Yeah.
But but over the course of the academy, getting faster, getting better, getting stronger. But I will say that I think a lot of people, and this is something else that I think kind of hurts people going to the academy, is they focus so much on the physical part of it that they neglect the mental part of it, the academic part of it. Because the real beatdown, all the miles of running, all the rowing, all the physical, that's tiring.
Yeah.
But the real beatdown is the academic side. It's being able to sit in a class for 6 or 7 hours listening to lectures and retain enough of it so that the next day you can take a test over what you just learned.
Testing every week?
You're testing every week. You're testing, and each one of these tests is important.
Yes.
You fail a test, pretty soon you're actually looking at, am I going to be able to stay in the academy? Because the standards, and it's going to work a little bit different in each academy. But,
exactly, yeah.
But there is a standard, there is a threshold, and if you're not meeting those kinds of minimums, then, the academy personnel is going to look at you, going to go to your department and say, we're not sure if this person is going to be able to get through the material. Because remember, at some level, you're taking all these classes, but eventually you're going to be out there on the street. You're going to be out there actually doing the job, and you have to know penal code.
Yes.
You can't be guessing about it.
Yeah.
You have to know where your authority is. You have to know your CCP. You have to know, because
Code of Criminal Procedure, constitutional law. You need to know all of that.
you need to know it because you have to be able to enact this.
Yeah.
So I on Sunday pulled over a guy. Step out of the patrol vehicle, and he smells like, he's been smoking marijuana. I can tell it when I step up. And so I'm walking up to his car, and in my head I'm thinking, okay, what do I got here? Where's my authority? What right do I have to be here? I'm running through all these questions that I learned to ask in the academy.
Absolutely.
Because I had to decide, can I pull him out of the car? Can I put him in cuffs? Can I search his car? Can I search the bag inside of his car? All of those things. And some of these are kind of trivial, perhaps. You could make, but I'm running through all this stuff because I know at some level I've got a camera on, and someone's going to watch that camera.
Exactly.
And they're going to ask themselves, did he do it right?
Yeah.
Maybe this isn't going to be the case that winds up going viral on YouTube or something, but it might be, something that I do could result in this person not being held accountable. Something that I do could result in me being held accountable for actually violating his civil rights.
Absolutely.
So you've got to know what your authority is. You have to know this stuff, not be able to just pass the test with it. And that's the thing that I think, some of the cadets, they got really good at being able to take that test, but not necessarily really good at being able to remember it for the next exam. It's like that flash memory versus long-term memory.
Because it's built in every class that
every
you
class
take.
builds,
It builds on the next class.
And not only does that help your class, but it's also going to help your performance out there in the field.
Yeah.
Because, you're going to go through, you have FTO and you've got all kinds of other things. You're going to get repetition in all of this.
Yeah.
But someday it's going to be just you in the car by yourself. And if you don't know your stuff, you're going to get yourself in trouble.
You are definitely going to get yourself in trouble. You're going to get caught out.
You will, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
We have to, if anybody's going to protect your rights, or protect the sort of the rights of civilians. It's got to be the officer who's actually out there in charge. Is the entire time I'm in your car, I'm thinking to myself, okay, what can I do? What's my authority to be here?
Yeah.
Because I want to protect your rights just as much as you want me to.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get called out. I don't want to be, but frankly, just as an individual.
Yeah.
As an individual, I want to make sure that I respect your rights the same way that I would expect an officer to respect mine. And I think that it's only fair.
You're touching on points that should mean a lot to every individual out there.
Well, and I will say that I was lucky. I was fortunate to have instructors in the academy.
Yeah.
I was lucky to have a sort of an FTO coordinator who was really stressing those kinds of points. That we are, first and foremost, what is our job? What is our duty, right? And the way that my FTO talked about it is it's to be instructive, to help people understand what the law is.
Yeah.
Now, if we can, catch the bad guy, if we can catch the drug, all those things are great. But we want to make sure that we do it in such a way that we're zealous for the law, but not overzealous.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk about perceptions of the generational differences. Here you are, 55, you're in the academy. Can you share your general perceptions of police officers based on your new experiences now? What did you go in, let me change that. When you went in, you had certain perspectives on policing. Did it change when you went into the academy and made it successfully through the academy?
I think my perspectives on policing changed. So, you asked the question. There was two. The question that you almost asked me was what I thought about the generational differences.
Exactly, and then I switched it.
And that one I'm really curious about, because when I started off, I expected there to be wide generational divides.
Yeah.
But I had started looking at some of the business literature about generational differences in people who were seeking advanced degrees and stuff like that. And what it was telling me was that the differences aren't nearly as big in reality as they are from the standpoint of like managers. So I had seen in the IACP research or their IACP magazine all this stuff about Gen Z,
International Association of Chiefs of Police. Yes.
I had seen this stuff about how Gen Z was just different. They were different this way and different that way. Different.
Exactly. Yeah.
And frankly, when I got in there, people are different. But what I found was that most of the cadets that I was in the academy with, that most of the cadets that I've gotten to know since I went through the academy, they're there for the same kinds of reasons that I would have gone there. They're there to do the same. They're good people. They're hardworking people. They're not. They're not
lazy.
They're not lazy. No, that's just what I had heard, is that they were going to be lazy, that they were going to be emotional, that they were going to be
attention spans.
And some of that might be true, but I didn't go to the academy 50 years ago. I don't know what it was like then. But what I can say is the people that I met in the academy would be people that I would be proud to know as a police officer.
Excellent.
That's not to say maybe there are some weak ones, maybe there are some people that shouldn't be there, but that's probably true in any field. But generally speaking, I would stand next to any one of them and not be afraid. Know that they were going to respect me, to respect other people, because I'm 55.
Yeah.
And I'm going into this field, and it's mostly, these are people who are in their mid-20s, early 30s, and they treated me like a brother,
Yeah.
And it was an incredibly meaningful experience for me.
You're going to remember that for the rest of your life.
Oh, yeah. It was, at the end of the whole thing, we got to vote on the person that we thought was the most distinguished cadet.
Yeah.
And they nominated me.
Oh, wow.
And, and when that plaque was awarded to me, it was everything I could do to actually hold back the tears. One or two of them made it past. But it was, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I knew it was coming. I had been told that I had won that award.
Yeah.
But when they actually went to hand me that plaque, I didn't realize how meaningful it was to me. That how much I had changed. Okay, now we get to your second question that you asked. The question about how did my perceptions of policing change?
Perceptions, yeah. And your perspectives on those.
This is one of those things where I'm still pretty critical of policing.
Yes.
I'm an academic, right? I'm a criminologist.
Yes.
And I'm interested in sort of policing as a system and as a part of a larger criminal justice system. That part hasn't changed. My level of respect, though, I think did change. You know, it's one thing to sort of be in a classroom and talk about how complex the police job is.
Yeah.
It's another thing to actually be out there on the street and realize, holy crap.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is a complicated
I'm really
task.
out here. Yeah.
And so I think that going through the academy kind of started opening my eyes a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm sort of radically transformed. I still have a fairly critical lens.
Yes.
I look at the things that we're asked to do. I look at the things that police officers do, you know, and I ask myself, okay, is that where we should be?
Yeah.
But with that kind of in mind, I think my perspective did shift a little bit. I now see the nuance and the complexity to a much larger extent than I did. And I think that may be the kind of one thing that sometimes the academic literature might be missing, is that lack of attention to the nuance, to the little things that police officers are doing.
You know, you're bringing up something that I didn't even think I would ask, but with you being the academic, Jason, do you think that you'll publish in that area of what your observations have been? I mean, you're new to the Brotherhood now. You're part of this fraternity.
No, I've got a couple of different sort of ideas that I'm working on. One of them is an idea that my oldest daughter, who's a psychology major, she and I came up with kind of an interesting idea a couple of months ago that we're actually working on with a group of cadets now. It's kind of a quasi-experimental thing, and it comes, you know, a little bit out of my experience, a little bit out of my academy experience, but you know, it was kind of driven by a more academic orientation. For my part, the things that I'm actually hoping to publish, the things that I'm happy to accomplish, is to go back and answer that original question about what accounts for this attrition rate. Why do so many? Because, you know, in that original article, the way they kind of talked about it was, you could sort of imagine that a third of officers won't make it through the academy.
Yes.
The third of the people who do make it, you know, 25% won't make it through FTO.
Yes.
Of the people who do make it, a third won't make it for 18 months. You know, and so I'm looking at that, I'm thinking about those kinds of numbers and trying to ask myself why. And I think I'm going to continue to pursue that question, that series of questions, and hopefully be able to communicate that to, you know, to chiefs, to people who are out there who are trying to do recruiting, to the academic literature, to, you know. So I'm hoping that that's going to be my contribution of my experience will be in maybe improving our ability to sort of identify who we should be recruiting, and what we need to be communicating to those recruits at a very early stage. That's kind of part of it. Some of it's kind of expectation setting that we don't necessarily do a good job, I think, of explaining to officers exactly what the expectations are going to be. You know, they've all watched the police procedural shows on television. It's not that way. I mean, if it did work that way, policing would be more exciting. It would also be a whole lot more unethical. I mean, if you watch the shows, right? You know what I'm saying? You know, on the shows, police officers get away with everything. You know?
Yes.
That's not the way the reality works. I mean, I'm out there doing my best to ensure that everything I do, every decision I make, respects the rights of people, not trying to find ways around them. You know.
Well, let me ask you this: community engagement, is that important in policing, in your opinion, or no?
You know, and I think one of the things
and maybe that's just a fluffy word, but tell me what you think.
It is, and I think it's kind of sad because I do think it gets treated like a fluffy word when it's not. I mean, you know, we know this from kind of prior research. We know that the more a community respects police, the more likely they are to call the police. To engage with police. We need the community, right? Without them calling for service, without them participating in our investigations, everything kind of grinds to a halt.
Absolutely.
So, you know, the community, the police need the community, but the community needs the police. I mean, it is. So I think being out there engaging and sort of creating that kind of dialogue, I think it's going to be an important thing. I think it's something that we played with. I mean, you know, over the last several decades, we have these kinds of community policing.
Yes.
And you and I both know there's a lot of agencies out there who, if you ask them what kind of policing, they have community policing on their websites, right? The chief gets, goes and gives speeches about community policing.
All fluffy and nice.
But the reality is they really haven't changed too much.
Exactly.
They're still doing the same old thing.
Yeah.
It's problem-oriented policing.
Yes.
Problem-oriented policing probably has its place, but it's hard to say community policing doesn't work when you've never actually really given it a shot.
Yeah.
And that's what I think I'm finding sometimes from older officers is they talk really negatively about community policing. But I've never heard them describe to me anything that they did that really looked like community policing, other than they use the phrases.
Yes.
That's not exactly true, because I've talked with you, I've talked with other officers.
Yeah.
I know some people were out there living it.
Yes.
But there are plenty of people out there who are talking it.
Well, even, when I was a neighborhood patrol officer, it was kind of funny. We're community police. We're invested in community police initiatives. You're given the title neighborhood patrol officer because you're tasked to work with the community there in your district or your beat. But the regular line officer, patrol officer says, you know what NPO stands for? It stands for non-productive officer, because you're not doing anything other than out there kissing babies and going to community meetings.
And I think, unfortunately, I get it. I understand that sort of attitude,
yeah.
Right? But at some point, and I think we saw this in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
At some point, the community became afraid of police.
Yes, absolutely.
And that changed the dynamic, right? Because the community became afraid of the police, and then the police became afraid of the community.
Yes. When you hear, it's funny you say that. When I hear, and it drives me crazy, when I hear this phrase, well, all I'm trying to do is make it through my 10 or 12 hours. Who wants to work like that?
Yeah. And I think this is kind of one of the barriers to entry to policing, is we've all heard so many stories about, police officers being attacked.
Yeah.
It does happen. It's relatively rare, but it does happen. But that story becomes such a powerful one, right? I mean, in the academy, we watched some of those videos, and sometimes you could just feel the air just get let out of the classroom.
Yeah.
We watched the video of the officer in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Holy cow. I mean, when we watched it the day after that happened, it was like somebody had letting the air out's the only thing, because nobody was even breathing anymore.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of the officers in there, a lot of the cadets in there, it was the first time they'd ever really thought seriously about, holy crap.
Yeah, this could be me.
I could lose my life in that heartbeat.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things do happen. Fortunately for everybody, it's relatively rare.
Yeah.
But if you become convinced that that's what policing always looks like, that that's the way it's always going to be, that that's what your shift is going to look like, then you start treating people differently. And I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, when I'm doing a traffic stop, I'm really attentive to my body position. I'm really thinking about where those pillars are. I'm really, I've never had a feeling that anybody in that car was about to jump out.
Let me ask you this, because we talked on this, switching gears just a little. How important is diversity within police departments to you? Or is it important? What do you think? I don't want to say you don't think it's important. What's your perspective?
It's kind of funny, because right now, this sort of topic of diversity is kind of a hot button issue. Frankly, I don't sort of understand why it is. It seems to me that you want a sort of a large representation of your community showing up in uniform.
Yes.
You want people sort of working communities that understand those communities. You want people, showing up to a call that look like you sometimes. And I'm not saying every officer has to.
Not every officer.
But it can't all just
good
be
representative number.
A good representative. That's all. I think that's all that anybody in policing sort of really wants is, you make the processes fair.
Yes.
And you kind of, you open it up to as many people as you can actually get to come in. It hasn't always been true that the processes were fair. We know that from the sort of research.
Yes.
And maybe there were some missteps one direction or another in the past. I don't know. But I do think that you definitely need people of all different stripes in that uniform, because because you're going to be working with people that I don't know where that person's coming from.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and you know, we had this conversation before.
Yes.
You know, you take somebody who comes from a,
upper crust society.
You know, I grew up on a farm.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know nothing about cities.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up on a farm, and so I can tell you all about, you know, sort of putting cows back in a pen or something like that. But there are experiences that I've never had, and so I'm there's a guy in sort of my patrol area. He's got chickens. I understand chickens. And we've had some real fun conversations about his chickens. But there are other things that are happening in that patrol area that just don't make any sense to me. It's not where I'm from. It's not anything like I've ever experienced. I don't understand in that kind of intellectually, I understand poverty.
Yes.
But in that kind of visceral sort of, I've never experienced that.
You know, that's the best way to put it, I think, Jason. We all have different experiences, and they take us to different levels. And I like the part that you said. The visceral experiences, someone who's actually been through that can relate to it. Someone who hasn't.
And
can't.
not every officer needs to have that experience.
True.
But you need to have people who've all had. And this is something that, so Fort Worth PD is doing, maybe I'm not supposed to talk about this.
Well, no, that's fine. Whatever you want to say.
So, but Fort Worth PD is doing something really interesting right now. They're running sort of an academy for high school students. And they're bringing in high school students from parts of the city where you normally don't get good representation in the actual police academy.
That's outstanding.
And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to build a sort of a group of people who come from these diverse backgrounds, kind of economically.
A recruitment pool early.
And to give people, particularly in neighborhoods that may otherwise have kind of negative perceptions of policing, a different view of what policing is all about.
I think that's a good first step.
I think it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I think so. So, what role do you believe accountability plays in law enforcement?
Sort of thinking about the kind of the different ways. So we think about the sort of the different ways that we can actually approach accountability. The first level of accountability is personal accountability.
Okay.
And to my way of thinking, that's a sort of a huge issue. There are some people who are police officers who will become police officers that never should have been there because they're not accountable to themselves, they're not accountable to anyone else. And so, you know, we might call it integrity, we might call it, you know, there's some other phrases.
All of the other catchphrases, you're right.
But I think that one of the things that you find is, you know, you need officers that can say, you know, I made a mistake. You need officers that can own up to that mistake and learn from it. And fortunately, I would say that a lot of the people that I went to the academy with do seem to have that character. There are a couple, you know, in every field, you know, who are going to refuse to admit that it was anything they did.
Yes.
You know, and if you're right, you're right. But when you're wrong, you have to live with that too. But the other level of accountability, I think, is sort of accountability to the public. And I think that's kind of where most people are focusing sort of at the moment. And I think that's right. I mean, you know, police officers are, you know, public servants. And, you know, we don't want to sort of kind of belabor that too much, but I mean, you know, you are getting paid to actually be a representative of law enforcement to the public.
Absolutely.
And you have certain standards, you know, that you have to be willing to uphold. And it doesn't always make sense to everyone, but there are standards. And those standards not only, you know, the standards that you're holding them to also apply to you. It's funny, you know, I had someone the other day for the first time actually pull out a camera and start recording me.
How did that make you feel? I know that was strange, wasn't it?
It was funny. When we got done, I said, "Well, are you going to post that?" You know, because I had already turned my camera off, or you know, everything. He goes, "No," and I said, "Yeah, there was nothing really there to post, was there?" I said, "But you know, you should actually post it just because of that.
Yeah.
The tag should be, you know, officer goes crazy and does the right thing."
What do you think about empathy? How important is empathy, in your opinion, in policing?
Well, that's a good one. Like I said, I mean, I'm out there. I'm in my kind of personal journey in policing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty short. But it's fun. It's been interesting because occasionally you're out there doing something, and the law says this is, this is what will happen. This is what should happen. This is what shall happen. And sometimes you don't necessarily feel it. So, not long ago, I'm interacting with this individual, and everything that I said to him was right. Everything that I said to him was true.
Yeah.
Everything that I was adhering to that letter of the law, I wasn't feeling it.
Oh, wow.
And there's that, officers have some discretionary ability.
Yes.
And I think that's where the kind of the empathy sort of comes in, right? I mean, can you put yourself in another person's position? Can you imagine yourself in another person's shoes? If you were in that place, what would be the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Not necessarily what would be the legal thing to do, but what would be the right thing to do? And listen, I'm not saying that you ignore infractions of the law, but where you have discretion, you don't always have to enforce the full. I don't know. I don't want to say that and get myself in trouble, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, we do this all the time, right? You see a car, it did not cease movement. It ran through the stop sign. You don't pull every one of them over, right? The ones that tried to slow, the ones that almost came to a stop, you let those go. Should you stop them? Should you pull them over? Well, if you go and look in sort of the Texas traffic code, right? Cease movement, that's the standard.
Yes.
So why don't we pull them all over? Because, and then you walk up to the car and you see that it's a sort of a young person who's dealing with a baby and who's got, and do you give them a ticket? You didn't cease movement, and that's where I'm saying I can feel empathetic for that person. I can say, you know what, they got a lot going on. Here's one of those places where I can be instructive rather than trying to hang them up.
Absolutely, using good discretion.
And I think discretion and empathy work together somehow.
Yes.
It's the hard part, I think, and this is a long conversation we should have one day. I think the hard part is, do you feel equally empathetic to all people or people who look like you?
That's a good question.
And that's where, if I'm going to give you a break,
Yes.
then am I giving that same break to someone
everybody.
else?
Yeah.
Because if I'm not, okay, what does that actually say about, I think if I'm being truly empathetic, right, if I'm sort of finding myself in your shoes and then cutting you a break because I can imagine having a colicky child when you're trying to get home and it's rush hour and all, if I can put myself in your shoes, am I going to put myself in the shoes of the next person I stop? And so what I've tried to do is I've tried to sort of create sort of, standards of conduct.
Yes.
And I know that's, if you do your best to actually come to a stop, I'm willing to give you credit for a stop. If you blow through without slowing, that's a ticket.
Oh, wow.
I
think that's fair enough. Let me ask
now,
you.
I will stop people. I stop them all the time and say, hey, just to remind you,
Yes.
there is a stop sign there.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to be instructive
Yes.
rather than destructive.
Yes.
Because handing out tickets all day long, I'm sure you were talking earlier about sort of community policing, right?
Yes.
I'm being an NPO, right? I'm not productive, right? I could be generating a whole lot more money.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think I am being productive. I think that I'm generating understanding. I think I'm helping people understand. I don't think there was anything wrong with that, as long as I'm applying the same standards to all groups of people.
That makes very good sense. Let me ask you this. This is one last message, or one last question. What message would you have for aspiring police officers if you had one to put out there? What would your message be? What message would you convey to them?
Yeah, right now in the kind of research that I'm doing, the kind of the experience that I had, I would say that the number one thing that makes an officer or cadet successful is knowing why they're there. And this sounds, simplistic, I suppose.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about becoming a police officer, what I want you to do is take out a sheet of paper and I want you to write your why down. why do you want to do this?
Yeah.
Not the answer that you're going to give to the chief, right? Because everybody's going to tell the chief, I want to help the community, right? I want you to tell yourself, why are you going to be there? Why do you want to be a police officer? Is it for your family? Is it for your friends? Is it for the money? Is it for, it doesn't really matter to me what your why is.
Yeah.
But own that why. Know what that why is. And keep that close to your heart, because at some level, at some point in your academy journey or in your policing journey, at some point you're going to hit a day where you forgot why you were there.
Yeah.
Right. If you forgot why you were there, it can lead to all kinds of negative outcomes, right, for yourself or other people.
Yeah.
You need to know what your why was. And again, this isn't the why that you're going to talk to the chief, the why for the interview board. This is your why. Keep sight of what that is. And like I said, keep it close to your heart, because that's what's going to pull you through those rough days when nothing else can.
That makes sense. At this point, I've been working to get you for an interview, Jason, Dr. Jason Clark Miller, Officer Jason Clark Miller. Welcome to the fraternity, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.